They linked her pain to him. He didn't even flinch. The integration chamber was chilled, the metallic tang of ionized air humming beneath the harsh fluorescence. Mason stood between two Veyran sentinels, wrists confined by bands of violet energy that shimmered with a faint, dangerous light. His uniform was ragged, the fabric stained and torn from months of captivity, but his eyes were alert, too sharp, too alive for a man meant to be broken. He had learned early that the Veyran were fascinated by endurance, especially human endurance, as if they were scientists dissecting the concept of hope itself. Every moment here was a test, and today, anticipation crackled in the air, electric and heavy. At the center of the room, two elaborate seats rose from the floor, their surfaces laced with glassy conduits and cables spun with golden thread. Princess Lysira already occupied one, her posture impeccable, her aura daunting. She was resplendent in her obsidian armor, the plates catching and fracturing the sterile light. Her skin had the sheen of the moon on ice, ethereal blue and cool. Her hair, a riotous red, cascaded over her shoulders in stark contrast, framing a face both beautiful and unyielding. Two horns, black and elegantly swept back, crowned her head. Her eyes, molten gold and piercing, regarded Mason as if she were looking through him rather than at him. A Veyran technician, third eye set in the center of his forehead, gestured at the empty seat beside Lysira. "The buffer will be positioned," he intoned, his voice devoid of sympathy, as though reading from a script. Mason said nothing, not trusting himself to speak. The sentinels guided him forward, the energy cuffs tightening slightly as if warning him not to resist. He sat, back straight, watching Lysira with a wary curiosity. The seat adjusted to his frame, restraints snapping shut across his chest and legs with a hiss. He felt the pulse of energy in the cables, alive, waiting. The technician hovered between them, adjusting dials on a crystalline panel. Princess Lysira's power is unmatched, but the neural backlash can destroy even the strongest. Your human resilience has been chosen to absorb the surplus. It is a privilege. Mason's lips curled in the barest hint of a smile, but he kept silent. He was not here for their approval, nor for their fascination with his suffering. Instead, he studied Lysira. She watched him with that cold, analytical detachment, her expression carved from ice. A crown of delicate filaments descended from above, the tendrils glinting like gossamer wire. The moment hovered, oddly intimate, a hush falling over the chamber. For an instant, it felt like standing on the precipice of a confession. "Begin the link," Lysira commanded, her voice ringing clear. The technician pressed a control, the filaments activated with a ripple of blue and gold, brushing against Mason's scalp and Lysira's horns. The world dissolved in a shrill resonance, a vibration so pure and sharp it felt as though his bones might shatter. Then the pain hit, searing, unrelenting, a psychic maelstrom of violence and torment. Images battered his mind, battlefields soaked in alien blood, the dying screams of warriors, the agony of 1,000 lost wars. The weight of it threatened to crush him, to grind his sense of self into dust. He tasted the edge of oblivion, teetering, but he did not fall. Mason retreated into himself, finding the compartments he had built from years of war and suffering. Pain was no stranger. It was an old adversary, respected but never feared. He let the agony wash over him, let it fill every crevice, and did not resist. He endured. His breathing steadied, the pulse at his throat slowing. The observers, Veyran nobles and scientists lining the upper gallery, waited for the inevitable collapse. None came. He focused on Lysira through the haze. She gritted her teeth, her jaw tense, but she was watching him now. Not as an object, but as a puzzle. Their pain mingled, spiraling and feeding back. He met her gaze, unwavering, and saw her surprise. He did not merely survive. He absorbed the pain, making it part of himself without breaking. Eventually, the resonance faded, leaving a hollow silence. The filaments withdrew, trailing sparks. Mason's restraints released. He slumped, sweat slicking his brow, but his eyes never left Lysira. She rose from her seat, graceful and composed, though her hands trembled minutely. Hours later, Mason sat in the sterile quiet of his cell. The walls pulsed faintly with containment fields, the air sharp with ozone. He sat cross-legged on the narrow cot, breathing evenly, sifting through the remnants of the link. The experience had been invasive, violating, but beneath the psychic storm he had glimpsed something. Discipline, focus, a mind shaped by endless conflict. And, unexpectedly, a fragment of Lysira's power now shimmered inside him, alien and intoxicating. The cell door slid open with a hiss. Lysira entered, flanked by 2 guards. She dismissed them with a flick of her wrist, the door sealing behind her. She prowled the narrow space, the points of her boots clicking on the floor. "How?" she demanded, frustration bristling in her voice. "The backlash has shattered our finest. It should have destroyed you." Mason opened his eyes, calm and direct. "Field medic. My work is to manage suffering." She scoffed, the sound sharp. "You are a buffer, nothing more." Her golden eyes narrowed. She struck him with a sudden psychic lash, expecting a scream, a breaking point. Instead, she recoiled, staggered by what she found. A memory, vivid and unguarded, of Mason kneeling beside a dying comrade, his voice low and comforting, offering solace in the shadow of death. The feedback was instantaneous. Lysira wrenched back, severing the link with a gasp, visibly shaken. "Stay out of my mind, human," she spat. He inclined his head, measured. "You're the one who keeps reaching." For the first time, Lysira looked at him not as a tool, but as a mystery, one she could not unravel. Frustration warred with intrigue in her eyes as she turned and strode out, leaving Mason alone with the remnants of her power humming softly in his thoughts. The training hall was vast, carved from seamless slabs of dark crystal that rose like cliffs into a starless dome. Holograms shimmered and flickered, shifting the landscape with each passing second. Obstacles, simulated threats, and a gallery of Veyran symbols that pulsed to a hidden rhythm. Princess Lysira moved at the center, her obsidian armor glinting, energy blades trailing after images of violet fire as she danced among a circling swarm of combat drones. Above, Mason watched from a suspended platform, hands clasped behind his back, flanked by 2 Veyran guards in silver-gray plate. He wore the same plain attire they had provided for his captivity, but his posture was erect, his gaze unwavering. Lysira had demanded his presence here. No explanation, only the expectation that he would observe and endure. He glanced down, tracking Lysira's form as she launched into a spinning arc, blades humming. Her movements were a study in predatory grace, every feint, every leap calculated and sharp. The drones pressed in, firing bolts of coherent light. Lysira twisted between the beams, slicing 2 drones in half with a single sweep, their remains dissolving into sparks. Beside Mason, Rin, Lysira's lieutenant, watched with undisguised contempt. He was taller than most Veyran, his skin a stormy blue, his horns ridged and thick. The crimson sigil of his rank was etched across his jaw. "A primitive should not witness the rites of a Veyran warrior," Rin said, voice low but carrying. "He diminishes the sanctity of the arena." Lysira dispatched the final drone, severing its head with a flourish that sent energy scattering across the crystal floor. She turned, golden eyes burning, and fixed them on Mason. "He is not a spectator," she replied, her tone cold as the void between stars. He is a tool I intend to understand. As she spoke, she brushed against Mason's mind, a controlled wave of fury, sharp and deliberate. Mason felt it, a prickling along his spine, the subtle tremor in his fingers as the energy sought a weakness. He let the sensation wash over him, absorbing it as he had learned to do. His body tensed only minutely, betraying nothing more. Yet this time Lysira recoiled inwardly. Through the contact she felt something unexpected, a flicker of focus that was not her own. For an instant Mason's mind mapped her movements, overlaying his calm tactical analysis onto her instincts. The sensation was intimate, unsettling, as if she were moving with two sets of awareness at once. Rin, unable to endure the breach of tradition, leapt from the gallery into the arena. His boots struck the crystal floor with a resonant thud. "Princess!" he called, drawing his own blade of crackling blue energy. "Let me prove that human frailty does not belong among us." Lysira regarded him, one brow arching. "Very well, Rin, show me." They circled, blades raised, the crowd of lesser Veyran warriors gathering at the rim of the hall. The duel began with a clash of energy and metal, sparks arcing in dazzling spirals. Rin pressed forward, aggression and pride fueling each blow. Lysira countered, her blade a blur of motion, parrying with clinical precision. The psychic link between Lysira and Mason deepened. She channeled her pain, her exertion into him, testing, measuring, seeking the limit. Mason's mind absorbed it all, his breathing quickening but his presence steady. Overlaid on Lysira's instincts, she felt his tactical clarity, his assessment of Rin's footwork, the tightening of his left grip, the fraction of a second he left his guard open. Lysira exploited each opening, her strikes growing bolder, more efficient. Their movements synchronized, hers born of alien strength and tradition, his of fieldwork and survival. Lysira ducked under Rin's sweeping arc, pivoted, and delivered a swift kick to the back of his knee. Rin stumbled. Mason's insight whispered through the link, a suggestion rather than command. Lysira swept Rin's legs, sending him crashing to the floor. She pressed the tip of her blade to his throat, breathless, victorious. Rin's pride was wounded more than his body. He glared up, the humiliation burning in his eyes. "You fight with something foreign inside you," he spat. Lysira's answer was silent, but her gaze flicked to Mason, acknowledgement hidden in the depths of her gold eyes. The link pulsed between them, thick with adrenaline and triumph. Then, as Lysira withdrew her blade, a surge of emotion spilled through the psychic bond. Not pain, not violence, but a memory as raw and luminous as an open wound. Mason's sorrow flooded her, a memory of helplessness, the moment a patient slipped away beneath his hands. Lysira saw, felt, every detail. The metallic tang of blood, the desperate pressure of his palms, the hush as hope died. The purity of it stunned her, so alien to the Veyran ethos of domination and pride. Her breath caught. For the first time, moisture welled in her eyes, a sting she had not known since childhood. She jerked back from Mason, the psychic link fracturing with a silent cry. Anger warred with confusion across her face. "Remove him," she ordered, her voice ragged with unfamiliar emotion. The guard stepped forward, gripping Mason by the arms. He met Lysira's gaze one last time, unflinching, neither defiant nor submissive, but searching. Lysira's hands curled into fists, her armor glinting with restless energy. She watched as Mason was led away, shoulders squared despite the tension in the air. She had shared her strength with Mason, shaping him into a buffer, a vessel for her agony. But in that charged moment, it was he who had shared something deeper. His soul, stripped bare, offered not as a weapon, but as a truth she could not deny. Lysira remained alone at the center of the crystal hall, the echoes of Mason's memory lingering in her mind like a distant, haunting melody. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the unfamiliar ache that pulsed beneath her armor, a wound she had not expected and could not yet understand. In the silent integration chamber, the chill lingered like a warning. Lysira stood at the center, her obsidian armor gleaming beneath the clinical lights, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and anticipation. The chamber was emptier than before, stripped of observers save for the counselors watching from behind polarized glass. This was the ordeal. A trial not of brute strength, but of the mind's ability to withstand and shape power. Lysira's face was calm, but her jaw was set. She had prepared for days, but something in her carriage had changed. She no longer regarded Mason as merely a tool. Now he stood at her side, no longer shackled, his expression one of focused resolve. They took their places. The twin seats waited, entwined with conduits that shimmered with stored energy. Lysira nodded once to Mason. He returned the gesture, silent understanding passing between them. His role had shifted, though the council would never say it aloud. He was no longer just a buffer. His mind had become vital to her survival. The filament crown descended, lowering itself over their heads. As the filaments brushed their skin, Mason felt the familiar flicker of anticipation. Then, the link ignited, hotter and brighter than ever before. Pain surged instantly, overwhelming. Lysira's power was a living thing, a tempest roaring through their conjoined consciousness. Agony screamed along every nerve, threatening to rip them both apart. Mason's body stiffened, breath seizing in his chest. Lysira's scream rang out, not from her lips, but in the psychic space they now shared. Her spirit was laid bare, stripped of armor, every wound and terror exposed. Mason felt his defenses falter beneath the onslaught. For a heartbeat, he hovered at the edge of oblivion, the pain too much even for him. But then, through the storm, his training asserted itself. He was a healer. This was not an attack. It was a wound. He shifted his focus, reaching beyond endurance into action. Within their joined minds, he visualized Lysira's pain as tangled neural threads, knots of anguish and memory pulsing with red-hot energy, drawing on every lesson from blood-soaked triage tents and desperate nights. Mason wove barriers, psychic gauze, dulling the shrillest signals, soothing the rawest places. He infused her with calm, steady, and cool, like a slow exhale after battle. Gradually, the chaos receded. Where there had been only pain, order unfurled. For the first time, Lysira was not at the mercy of her power. She was holding the reins, guided by Mason's steadying presence. The intimacy of the link deepened, a closeness more profound than words. He was not only her shield, he had become her healer. The trance drew on. Lysira moved through the phases of the ordeal, her control flawless. The council watched, impassive, but their collective approval crackled in the air. No Veyron had ever managed such composure, such seamless mastery. They credited the buffer, commending the ingenuity of his selection. When the crown lifted and the pain faded, Lysira's breathing was even, her posture unbowed. She caught Mason's gaze, something unspoken flickering in her molten eyes. The council murmured their approval, but Lysira knew the truth. Her strength was no longer hers alone. It was entwined with his, woven together like the filaments of the link. From that day forward, Lysira found reasons to summon Mason. Sometimes she demanded his presence for formal meetings, claiming she needed to study the effects of the bond. Other times, she called him with no pretext at all, summoning him to her private quarters under the pretense of reviewing reports. The staff learned not to question her, bowing and slipping away whenever Mason arrived. In those quiet, rarefied moments, Lysira dismissed everyone, the heavy doors sealed with a whisper, shutting out the world. She would sit across from Mason, sometimes in full armor, sometimes in a plain tunic, her hair loose and falling over one shoulder. They would share companionable silence, the psychic link alive in the air between them, no longer just a conduit for pain, but something more fluid, more delicate. One evening, Lysira paced restlessly before the high windows of her chamber, city lights flickering beyond the glass. Mason watched from the corner, waiting, his presence a quiet anchor. Finally, she turned, her gaze searching. "I want to understand," she said. "Show me what you did inside the link." Mason nodded, pulling two low chairs close together. "Sit with me." She obeyed, sinking gracefully into the seat, facing him. He reached out, not with his hands but with his mind, inviting her to follow. "Visualize your own patterns, like this." He projected the image into the space between them, shimmering threads, some tangled, some running clear. Lysira tried to focus, but frustration quickly rose. "They twist away from me. I cannot hold them," she hissed. Mason's mind brushed hers, soothing. "You're reaching too hard. Let them come to you. Breathe." She inhaled slowly, letting his calm seep into her bones. The threads settled, their frantic motion slowing. Together they traced the pathways, Lysira's concentration deepening with every heartbeat. When the frustration threatened to resurface, Mason pulsed reassurance through the link, a gentle wave of steady confidence. The intimacy was heady, a closeness without barriers. They sat that way for a long time, Lysira's posture slowly relaxing, her fingers uncurling from the chair's edge. When she finally opened her eyes, Mason was already watching her, a quiet pride in his gaze. After that night, the boundaries between duty and something more began to blur. Lysira found herself seeking him out, watching the way his hands moved as he worked, noting the quiet strength in his eyes. She paid attention to his laughter, rare but genuine, and the way he listened, truly listened, when she spoke of strategy or history, or her own hidden doubts. One evening, a storm swept the city, lightning flashing across the crystal spires. In Lysira's quarters, the air was soft, the lights dimmed. Mason sat on the floor, leaning against the window, reading from an ancient human text she had requested. Lysira watched him, unable to look away. Without thinking, she crossed the space between them, seating herself beside him. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling just a little, before she reached out and traced her fingers along the line of his jaw. Mason looked up, his eyes meeting hers. No fear, no surprise, just the steady acceptance she had come to depend on. Their gazes locked, the world receding until only the two of them remained. Desire sparked between them, electric and fragile. Lysira, undefeated warrior, felt a tremor of vulnerability ripple through her, a sensation more thrilling than any battle she had ever fought. She let her hand linger, her breath mingling with his. For once, she did not pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to feel, to savor the moment where victory was not measured in conquest, but in the quiet, unspoken promise that lived between two souls joined by something stronger than pain. Rin's suspicion had sharpened into certainty. He watched Lysira and Mason with narrowed eyes, the glances exchanged between them, the way her presence lingered just a moment too long in Mason's orbit. It was no longer merely that the human had survived, or even that he had become useful. There was something deeper, something dangerous, threading between the two. Rin's pride would not abide it. He arranged the trial with ruthless efficiency. Mason was summoned at dawn, escorted by silent sentinels through corridors of dark crystal to a chamber he had never seen. The gauntlet of minds. The air vibrated with psychic residue, a space built for the testing and breaking of Veyran elite. Cables and filaments snaked from the ceiling, the floor etched with sigils of focus and torment. Mason was strapped into a high-backed chair, the restraints humming as they sealed around his limbs and chest. Across the room, Rin stood at the controls, his expression cold and expectant. "The gauntlet was forged to temper the best among us," he said, fingers poised above the interface. "Few emerge whole. Some do not emerge at all. Perhaps now the Council will see your limits, human." Mason met his gaze, unflinching. "If that is what you need to believe." He felt the filaments lowering, cool against his temples. The simulation flooded his mind, a battlefield rendered in searing clarity, Veyran forces arrayed against a swarm of Cernai invaders. Every command Mason gave would ripple with consequence, each error punished by psychic feedback. Pain, doubt, isolation, loss. Rin's voice echoed in the chamber, amplified by the system. "Begin." Mason's first moments were chaos. Orders shouted, positions collapsing, every unit under fire. The simulation battered him with confusion, the ache of failure gnawing at his edges. But through the noise, a familiar presence brushed his mind. Lysira. She was not physically present, but her consciousness slipped through the link they had forged. "I am with you." Her voice whispered in his thoughts. Her certainty steadied him. The first enemy feint struck hard. A detachment lured into a trap. Mason reacted instinctively, sacrificing a decoy squad, drawing on tactics learned in childhood games of strategy with his sister. He remembered the lesson. Sometimes victory required letting go of the pieces you could not save. In their shared mind, Lysira observed with surprise. "You are not reckless," she murmured. "You wait. You watch. Even when it costs you." He pressed on. The simulation shifted, the enemy adapting. For every move, the psychic feedback sharpened. A wrong calculation brought a spike of agony, a misjudged advance, a wave of despair. Rin leaned in, waiting for Mason to break. But Mason's focus did not waver. He trusted the link, letting Lysira's presence fill the gaps in his own experience. He found weaknesses in the enemy lines, subtle fractures Lysira exploited with ruthless precision. She executed maneuvers he could only imagine, her mind and body an extension of his intention. Their awareness overlapped, seamless, his compassion tempering her aggression, her discipline reinforcing his resolve. Their memories bled together, unbidden. Lysira saw flashes of Mason's life, a childhood of makeshift games and laughter, the ache of loss when his mother fell ill, the resolve that steeled him in field hospitals. Mason, in turn, felt the cold echo of Lysira's youth, the vast halls of the palace, the weight of expectation, the loneliness of a girl raised to be untouchable. The simulation intensified, enemy reinforcements poured in, the odds stacked higher. Mason's hands trembled on the controls, but Lysira's mind steadied him. "We are not alone," she projected, fierce and warm. "Not anymore." The psychic torments faded, dulled by the focus they shared. There was pain, yes, but it was bearable, threaded through with understanding and a strange comfort. They moved as one, anticipating, adapting, evolving. On the final approach, Mason spotted a feint in the Cernai formation. He called it out. Left flank, masked approach, use the ravine, and Lysira executed, sweeping the field with a precision strike. The Cernai broke, the simulation landscape shifting into victory, banners rising in the virtual sky. The chamber lights snapped on. The simulation dissolved. Mason slumped in the chair, sweat slick on his brow, heart racing. Lysira's presence faded, but not entirely. Her warmth lingered in the back of his mind. Rin stared at the results, speechless. No Veyran strategist had ever completed the gauntlet without faltering. To see a human, and a buffer, no less, Achieve this was inconceivable. Mason stood, the restraints falling away. He met Lysira's gaze through the viewing glass, searching her face for the pride he hoped to see. It was there, but more than that. Gratitude and a fierce tenderness she did not bother to hide. In the aftermath, as the others filed away, Mason remained in the empty chamber, catching his breath. Lysira entered quietly, the doors sealing behind her. She did not speak at first, only crossed the distance between them and pressed her palm to his cheek. "You saved them all," she whispered, her voice trembling with feeling. "You saved me." He covered her hand with his, letting the silence deepen. In their shared mind, memories lingered. Lysira, as a child, watching the other heirs from behind a lattice of gold and glass. Mason, tending a wounded soldier in the dark, refusing to give in to despair. Their connection was no longer one of necessity. It was solace, and something deeper. A comfort neither had known before. Lysira closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I thought I knew strength," she murmured, "but this—" She opened her mind to him, letting him see the truth. The pride, the gratitude, the raw longing that had bloomed between them. "I am not alone." Mason drew her close, their foreheads touching. "Nor am I," he replied. The sense of being truly understood, of belonging, was almost overwhelming. The moment lingered, suspended in perfect stillness. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the stronghold, harsh and insistent, red light pulsing against the crystal walls. The door slid open, a guard rushing in. "Princess, the Cernae have breached the command. You must be protected now." Lysira straightened, her warrior's focus returning in an instant. She squeezed Mason's hand, one last silent promise, and strode from the chamber, Mason at her side, the bond between them unbreakable as they moved toward the new storm together. On the command deck, Lysira stood with her shoulders squared, golden eyes sweeping across a riot of data streams and flickering tactical displays. The flagship was alive with the tension of imminent war, alarms keening, crew members darting between stations, the hull trembling as the Cernae fleet closed in. Every instinct screamed at her to prepare for slaughter, to let her mind slip into the battle trance that made her more than mortal. But this time, the stakes were different. Survival demanded she risk everything, even the precious balance she had found. "Bring him," Lysira ordered, voice carrying through the din. Mason was ushered onto the deck, flanked by guards and engineers. The advanced integration chair gleamed, its restraints poised, its filaments already writhing with kinetic promise. Mason's jaw was set, his gaze unwavering as he stepped forward. Lysira caught his eye. There was fear there. Yes, but also trust. The unspoken certainty that whatever happened, they would face it together. Rin, still bloodied from the earlier assault, moved to intercept. "This is reckless," he protested, voice raised over the rumble of the flagship's engines. "The feedback could destroy you both. We have alternatives." Lysira's head snapped toward him, her horns casting sharp shadows. "There is no time for half measures. The Cernae will not wait for our caution." She stepped closer, her voice lowering to something that was not quite a plea. "Then we fall together." Rin faltered, searching her face for doubt and finding none. At last, he bowed his head. "As you command, Princess." The crew secured Mason in the chair. This model was a marvel of Veyron ingenuity, reinforced restraints, deeper neural threads, and a failsafe that hummed like a living heart. Lysira took her place in the command throne, her armor integrating with the control interfaces. The flagship lurched as it launched from the dock, plunging into the burning void of battle. The filament crown descended, settling over them both. The link ignited. Brutal, immediate, searing with pain, rage, and the raw psychic force of two minds flung together at the edge of survival. For a moment, the agony threatened to tear them apart, to dissolve them into a chaos of fury and fear. But this time, Mason was not only her shield, he was her anchor. He felt her battle trance rising, the wild storm of her power, and did not shy away. Instead, he grounded her, his presence threading through every surge of the violence, every spike of terror. He became the line that tethered her to herself. They fought as one. Mason's vision blurred, then clarified. He saw through Lysira's eyes, the dizzying sweep of the battlefield, the shimmer of enemy shields, the sweat on the brows of the bridge crew. He could feel the stress in the ship's hull, the heat of weapon cores, the frantic pulse of Veyron hearts all around them. Every wound Lysira suffered, every raw edge of psychic pain, Mason caught and transformed, channeling it into clarity, turning agony into sharpened tactical vision. "Enemy wing, starboard," Mason signaled, voice low in her mind. Lysira responded instantly, hands moving in perfect time with his warning. The flagship's batteries swiveled and unleashed a barrage, vaporizing a Cernai strike force before they could flank. The battle raged. The Cernai pressed with overwhelming numbers, wave after wave slamming against the Veyron lines. Each blow rattled the ship, each crisis threatened to break their focus. Mason felt Lysira's power threatening to spin out of control, her rage, her fear for her people, her desperate need to prove herself. He caught those emotions, wove them into a tapestry of purpose. "Breathe," he whispered through the link, sending a pulse of calm. "You are not alone." Lysira's mind locked with his, her trust absolute. Their movements synchronized. She anticipated his insights. He read her intent before she spoke. When enemy fire punched through the shields, Mason was there, transforming Lysira's pain into decisive action, her suffering into ingenious countermoves. A Cernai dreadnought loomed, weapons charging. Mason saw the telltale shimmer of its exposed core, a fleeting vulnerability. "Now, Lysira, the command ship's core is open, starboard vent." She did not hesitate. The flagship veered, all batteries focusing on the exposed point. Lysira unleashed the full fury of her mind, channeling Mason's clarity, her own rage sharpened to a lethal edge. The strike was devastating. Energy lanced through the Cernai flagship, tearing it apart from within. Shockwaves rippled through the enemy fleet, sowing panic and confusion. The Cernai broke, their formation collapsed, ships spiraling out of control or surrendering. The Veyron flagship pressed the advantage, routing the invaders. Mason felt the tide of victory sweep through the crew, a roar of relief and astonished pride. When the final shots faded, Lysira slumped in her throne, breath coming in ragged gasps. Sweat darkened her brow, her armor streaked with the heat of battle. The link still thrummed between them, but it was no longer strained. It was a lifeline, steady and warm. In the nerve center, Mason sagged against his restraints, trembling with the aftermath. Every muscle ached, his mind raw but intact. He became aware of Rin standing before him, the lieutenant's expression transformed. No longer suspicion, but something closer to respect. "You held her together," Rin said quietly. "You saved the flagship. Perhaps you are more than a buffer after all." Mason managed a tired smile. "We did it together." On the bridge, Lysira slowly straightened, head high despite her exhaustion. She searched the room until her gaze found Mason's, and in that charged silence, words were unnecessary. Her pride shone through the pain, her gratitude was unmistakable. As the crew celebrated, Lysira touched the link, sending a whisper to Mason. "You are my anchor, my strength." He closed his eyes, letting her presence flow through him. In their shared mind, the battle's violence receded, replaced by the quiet ache of survival and the pulse of something deeper. She reached for him, not as princess to buffer, but as equal to equal. Her storm soothed by his presence, his strength magnified by her fire. For a moment the world shrank to just the two of them, the boundaries that had once defined them, warrior and shield, champion and buffer, had fallen away. What remained was partnership, forged in agony and victory alike. In that hush after battle, their connection was not just a necessity, it was comfort, promise, and the beginning of something wholly new. In the grand hall, the air pulsed with argument. Voices ricocheted between the vaulted pillars, some sharp with fear, others measured with calculation. Counselors in robes of cobalt and silver debated from their raised platforms, their faces lit by the cool light pouring through crystalline skylights. Mason stood at the center of it all, a solitary figure on the polished obsidian floor, the focus of a debate that had ceased to be about him at all. "He is a risk," one counselor thundered, a fist pounding the bench. "We do not know what he is truly capable of. The link has changed him. And our princess." "He is an asset," countered another, voice cool and pragmatic. "He should be studied, utilized. His resilience is singular." Mason listened, resignation in his posture, arms clasped loosely behind his back. He had become accustomed to the feeling of being discussed like a tool or a hazard, not a person. He searched the crowd for familiar faces, but even the sympathetic among them kept their distance. There was a sense of something coming to an end, his usefulness perhaps, or simply his time among the Veyran. Rin stood at the front, features carved with determination. He spoke with the authority of a man who had fought and lost and learned to respect his rival. "You all see what you wish, but I see a threat. If Lysira is vulnerable to him, so are we. Remove him. Exile, at best. Dissection, if you're wise." Murmurs swept the hall, some approving, some horrified. Mason's jaw clenched, but he made no protest. If this was his fate, so be it. Then the great doors swung open, the sound echoing like a challenge. Lysira entered, her silhouette framed in the doorway, tall and regal, clad in ceremonial black armor traced with silver, her crimson hair cascading in a river of defiance down her back. Her eyes, once bright with fury, now burned with conviction, the storm inside her finally stilled. She strode forward, every stride a rebuke to the council's uncertainty. The hall quieted, voices dying in the wake of her presence. When she reached the dais, Lysira turned not to the council, but to Mason. The power in the gesture was unmistakable, a shift of gravity, a new center to the room. "He is not a resource," Lysira declared, her voice cutting through the silence. "He is not a threat. He is the other half of the weapon that saved our world." Her gaze swept the council, daring any to contradict her. "He is mine." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered assembly. Some looked stunned, others scandalized. Lysira ignored them all, closing the distance between herself and Mason with deliberate slowness. She lifted her hand and pressed it gently to his chest, above his heart. Her touch was both a declaration and a promise, as binding as any Veyran oath. "In the old rites," she said, voice softer now, "a consort is not chosen lightly. It is a bond forged in battle, in trust." She let her hand linger, her eyes never leaving Mason's. "I claim him as my battle consort. He is free of all bonds, save the one we choose together." The hall erupted in stunned silence. No one dared interrupt. The gesture was public, intimate, unassailable. Mason met her gaze, searching for doubt, and found only certainty. In that moment, Lysira marked him as her equal, her chosen, not a buffer, not a weapon, but a partner. Later, when the last echoes of debate had faded and the war was truly over, Mason stood in Lysira's private chambers. The room was awash in the golden glow of late evening, the city's lights flickering beyond vast windows. The integration device, once the center of his world, now rested in a glass case, a relic of battles won and burdens shared. Lysira lounged on a low couch, her armor set aside for a robe of midnight blue. She watched him as he drifted to the window, his reflection caught against the night. The weight of victory had brought its own uncertainties, the Council's shifting loyalties, the fragile peace outside these walls, and the question that lingered between them. She rose and came to stand beside him, her presence as grounding as ever. "You could return to your people," she said quietly, her voice gentle. "You have earned that right 100 times over. There would be no dishonor in it." He smiled, the lines at his eyes deepening. "My people have healers. They don't have you." His hand lifted, gentle on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line where anger and pain had once burned so fiercely. "What we share, there's no word for." Lysira's lips curved, a rare, radiant smile that softened every angle of her face. "We Veyran have a word," she replied. "Elisar. Spirits joined by fire, becoming one." She covered his hand with her own, holding it to her cheek. The air between them charged with longing, with relief, with everything that had not been said. "I no longer need you to bear my pain," she whispered. "But I still crave our bond." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, the world narrowing to the warmth of her breath, the steady thrum of her pulse. "So do I," he said, voice barely more than a sigh. They settled side by side on the couch. No restraints, no humming machines, only the choices they made for themselves, their fingers intertwined. The link between them bloomed, not out of necessity or survival, but out of love, deliberate and unguarded. Mason closed his eyes, letting their minds meet in perfect clarity. Lysira's presence was no longer a storm, but a sanctuary, her fire warming his calm, his steadiness grounding her strength. They breathed together, and in that quiet, their souls entwined, perfectly fused. Outside, the city celebrated peace. Inside, two hearts beat in time, each the other's home at last. That's the end of the story. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.